Chapter 19. Sunday early afternoon. By the time her grandmother left, Doreen was dying to delve into her research. Not only about the Steve issue with the helmsman payout, but also now a name and more paperwork to sort through on these 6 mystery hope chest boxes. And what to do with them was indeed a question that needed answers. With her laptop and a sandwich beside her, as the muffin hadn't been enough hours ago, she sat at the kitchen table and forced herself to rename a certain number of scanned-in files before she did some more research. By the time she was done renaming and researching, hours had passed. She groaned and looked at the amount of notes she had taken. She would need Mac's help. That arson file was one of them. She texted him the name on the arson and the payout and said, "I think I mentioned this before, but I'm still looking for answers." "That's nice," came his text in reply. She cringed at that. Then she resumed her research. On a whim, she looked at the total number of Google pages of hits for this search, and it was one of 97. She clicked to load page 20, then page 40, then page 60, and stopped to take a look at each quickly. When she randomly went through a few more pages, a picture came up. It was Steve, but a younger Steve with another woman at his side. The woman wasn't identified, and Doreen wondered how she could find out who it was. She saved it and read the article, which said he had been a benefactor to this woman who had suffered terribly in a house fire. Was that the arson payout she already knew about? She wondered about that, and started delving into the different names that came up in the article. That was the problem with research. When she found one rabbit hole, it led to a million other rabbit holes. By the time she was done, she had located 3 more house fires, all with Steve helping out. That really bothered her. She wrote those names down and texted them to Mac. 3 new names, re-house fires, and Steve handing over checks, she texted. "Check into them, please." Just then her phone rang. "What are you doing?" Mac snapped. "First off, it's a weekend and I'm not in my office. Second, why are you delving into Steve today, when we had this discussion already?" "We did indeed," she said cheerfully. "But as I was doing this research, I came up with a bunch of other fire scenarios where he's handing over checks and he's like this big benefactor. What if somebody he knows is lighting the fires? There's a problem or some purpose behind it, and Steve's out there, the good PR guy, getting all the kudos for being such a nice man, when in reality, he's part of whatever is going on behind the scenes." "Handing out checks?" Mac said. "But you can't tell me that is criminal." "No, but 3 house fires?" "Accidents," he snapped back. "1, yes. 2, possibly. But all 3. Plus the helmsman fire is 4. "No," Doreen said. Then she mumbled, "That's okay. I'll just wait until I get all the evidence and present you with yet another case to put with your name, and make it look like you're doing all the work." And she hung up. She wasn't mad at him, just the opposite. This had become some game between them. But then, he really did have access to the information she didn't. She thought about Solomon's case files on Steve. Were any of those names involved in fires also mentioned in Steve's folder? That would be something. Would it be easier to search the PDFs? She wasn't sure. She opened his computer folder she had created and realized several PDFs for him were there. She searched each PDF for the 4 names. On the 3rd PDF, something popped up. She read the article, and it was similar to what she had read earlier. She went to the physical folder, pulled out the paper copy, and flipped through it. There it was. Putting a paper clip on it, she set it off to one side, and then kept researching the scanned-in PDFs and finding the paper documents in Solomon's folder. Sitting down, she read the accumulated stack and interpreted Steve's actions as philanthropic, helping suffering people. But these dealt with just 3 fires, not the helmsman fire. In the articles on these 3 house fire cases, the men had died, and the women had received money to help them out. Nan had stated Annette didn't have house insurance coverage. According to what she'd read in Solomon's files regarding the other 3 cases, there was no insurance coverage on any of the houses. Doreen thought that was odd. Didn't anybody else wonder? This was a long time ago, so maybe Doreen would never know if the original investigators were curious about this too. However, if people were broke, paying for insurance might be one of the first things they couldn't do anymore. She texted her findings to Mac. It would keep him on his toes and maybe keep her in his mind. Not that she wanted him thinking about her all the time. Right now, that would probably make him really angry. But she laughed and thought about the work she was doing and how it would benefit everybody. Buoyed with good humor, she started researching Steve as a philanthropist. And then as a corporate lawyer working for the Devil Riders biker gang. By the time she was done, she had a better idea of what was going on. The articles dealing with these 3 men who had died in the 3 fires were all part of a different gang, called Satan Riders. Nothing suspicious about that. She snorted in disgust. The women with children had all been given a check to help them move on without their partners. She thought about a rival gang who would take out a man and leave his woman and children alone, and then help them out. She wondered at that mentality. If these payouts had just left them financially well off, that would have been nice. Of course though, Doreen had no way to know if the women received a big enough check to do them any good. Or if the Devil Riders biker gang had a hand in these men's deaths or the fires. No amounts were mentioned, and maybe it was a case of take this and disappear or else we're coming after you. Speaking of which, she realized she didn't even know where Steve lived, other than that he was a neighbor of hers. She searched for his address and found him in an article, standing with his arms around 2 other men who looked a little rough. They were in 3-piece suits though and pretty nicely cleaned up. But she recognized that sharkish look about them. Her husband had the same look. She studied the photo for a long moment before writing down their names and Steve's address. And then she double-checked online to see if that came up as his address. 2 other articles mentioned the street, so she assumed she was on the right track. But contacting Mac now was out of the question, or he'd be truly pissed. Searching for the address, she found it a little ways away, on her side of the creek. And just across from Penny's place and up a couple houses. Which explained why Doreen kept coming in contact with Steve. Several large estate properties were up there. She was kind of jealous of that. He had 3 acres along the creek, and according to the images she could see on Google, it was well protected and private. Of course he'd want privacy, wouldn't he? So how was it that he had a connection to Penny, and to all these other women? She didn't think Penny had mentioned how they'd first met. Not that it was important, but it was interesting. Doreen sat back and frowned. Did she get it all wrong with Penny? Did Steve have something to do with the murders in Penny's family? But no, Penny had admitted to killing her brother, and Doreen knew George had admitted to killing her father and the nurse in his journals, not directly confessing on paper, but enough to lead Doreen's imagination in that direction. Then George committed suicide, with the help of Penny and some lethal gardening plants. So that took care of that. But that didn't mean Penny didn't know about other instances in Steve's life. How long had they known each other? Several decades at least. From that one photograph Doreen had found earlier, it was obvious they had a very close relationship. She shook her head as she pondered this, then looked down at her critters all stretched out on the floor and asked, "Anybody want to go for a walk?" Muggs went from 0 to 60 once more. He jumped straight up in the air and then chased his tail in excitement. Goliath backed out of his reach and stared at him in disdain. Meanwhile, Thaddeus, who had been sleeping on his roost in the living room, flew toward her. He wandered around the corner of the hallway kitchen door, cocked his head at her, and said, "Thaddeus, walk. Thaddeus, walk." She chuckled. "Maybe we'll take a coffee with us and a granola bar." We'll take a look at where our lovely corporate lawyer/scumbag lives. The fact that he's so close to me is a little disturbing. I would like to know where the enemy resides before he shows up here again. Of course, Steve had already showed up more than a couple times. She brought a leash with her, just in case they had to be on the street, or if they met some undesirables. She didn't want Muggs completely getting away. He was generally very good, but a little bit of caution never hurt. Goliath, of course, had a mind of his own. Doreen was tempted to get a harness and put it on him, but thought it would be more of a YouTube sensation to watch Goliath try to get out of it. Since she couldn't tether Thaddeus, she figured it wasn't fair to any of them. Tie up one and keep him a prisoner, while the others were free. It was much better that they all learned to walk together. Which she had to admit they did. They were a very nice and tight-knit group most of the time. Hopefully, Thaddeus wouldn't get sidetracked, and Goliath wouldn't take off after him, and Muggs wouldn't decide something out there was worth chasing. She could only hope that today, maybe of all days, they'd behave themselves.